Hi, Ian. Great to see you again.
Yeah, and you too. Just fire away straight into the first question.
Yes. Okay. So tell us a little bit about the new release. Let's start with the proper pronunciation of your latest.
Well, the word rock with the umlaut is an old Icelandic word meaning destiny, and Flote is the German pronunciation and spelling of the instrument that I play. But it became RokFlote after I think the second day of working on the album on on the 1st of January 2022 when I began. It became RokFlote because it had a working title at 9 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of January as Rock Flute, only because I told the record company it would be a rock album featuring the members of the band and it would be prominent flute playing, in a rock music context. So I just had a working headline just saying Rock Flute on my blank uh, uh, Word document on my computer. And by the end of the second day, I decided what the album was going to be about and roughly how I was going to work with it. And I decided to give it credible umlauts as the correct spelling of both those words. So it is a legitimate use of the umlauts and not misappropriated as in Motorhead or Motley Crue, for whom the umlaut is obviously an object of fascination that makes them sound tough and macho, I should imagine, in their own thoughts. But I'm just using the correct grammatic and spelling use of that grammatical device.
Great. So, and I noticed that this particular release, in reverse, your last release, which was in 2022, the Zella Gene. I mean, this is the shortest time period where you put out two great Jethro Tull releases. It's sort of a connection. I guess during the pandemic, you had plenty of time to, indulge and get back into some serious writing and recording. Is that how this came about?
Well, the Zealot Gene began in 2017, and I had finished 4 of the 12 tracks by the end of 2017. And 2018 and 2019 were very busy years for touring, plus we had the string quartet album to release. So when I finally got round to wanting to do the final 5 tracks with the band, unfortunately the pandemic hit, and then for the next year and a half we couldn't work together face to face. So we were really the album was put on hold, and I eventually decided just to finish it off myself at home in the summer of 2021 and delivered it to the record company, I think in June or July, and the release date couldn't be until January because of the time it takes to manufacture and press vinyl and so on. So it came out in January of 2022, by which time I'd already started work on the next album. But you could say, well, that they were only a little over a year apart. On the other hand, you could equally correctly suggest that they were 4.5 years apart, which is really the truth in
Okay.
terms of the writing. Because I'd written all of this Elegy back, by the middle of 2017. I had written the entire album, all the music and the lyrics and everything.
Great. Well, what strikes me with the new release is, you know, the sound of the release. It's very similar to sort of, the stuff that, you're known for in the 70s. The sound, some new releases today, I find they just don't have the sound, and even on digital downloads. In the case of this one, I noticed that the production on this is fabulous, and whoever mastered it, for digital content, it comes across nicely, and you can hear your influences obviously with progressive rock and your folk influence, but the sound struck me as like, wow, for a new release, this is of quality. Can you tell us a little bit
Well,
about?
I try to keep it simple. I've always preferred the idea that we make records by playing together in the studio, not disassembling things into a lot of Lego bricks and then putting them together at some later point. Yeah, I have sometimes recorded that way, but I much prefer to be with the guys in a room playing together, and we record that way. And we did that most of the time back in the 70s, and that's what we do, is play together, even when there have been electronic components in some music. There's still been, the majority of it has been played together in the studio in order to come up with arrangements that
Yes.
work. You really do have to hear what everybody's going to play, and then you fine tune things, change a few parts, and so it's a bit like rehearsing with an orchestra. I mean, you really do need to hear, as a producer, in my role as a record producer, I need to hear what everybody's going to do. I can remember talking to Bob Ezrin, a record producer, American guy, who
Sure.
recorded Pink Floyd, The Wall, and he told me of the difficulties that he faced in trying to visualize where they were going, because he never had all the band. He told me this, so maybe he was exaggerating, but he said he never had all the band in the studio together. He only ever had them one at a time to record their bits. They didn't want to seemingly perform or play together. Some of them didn't like each other very much, apparently. So, very difficult for a record producer if you actually don't have everybody there playing their parts and evolving the music together. It must be quite difficult to know where you're headed.
Well, the other thing is, longevity with you. I mean, being an amazing songwriter, through decades. Speaking of this tour that you're coming over to the pond to play, the 7 decades, boy, talk about some incredible highlights with a career. And now in 2023, you seem to be continuing that pattern. And I'm not just saying this because I'm speaking with you. I really think it's a quality release. And you go back to, like, geez, Aqualung 71, thick as a brick in 72. I mean, I can go on and on, Minstrel in the Gallery, and then your folk era stuff, Songs from the Wood, Heavy Horses. I mean, every decade you sort of morphed into something a little bit different. And I commend you, because, geez, the songwriting to continue that process, through decades, that's pretty astounding. So,
Well,
kudos to you. And
there are some great musical forces who've made a living out of really not straying or trying things that are different, who really sound, 30, 40 years later, they sound exactly the same as they did when they began. I mean, I would cite Morrissey as an example of that. The first time anybody heard Morrissey, unmistakably that was his voice, the musical style of the Smiths. And then, the more recent work that he's done, it's, again, musically, it doesn't really change a lot. And vocally, song topics, it remains very much a steady state. It is Fred Hoyle's musical steady state theory. And other bands are more the Big Bang. They start off with a huge burst of energy, and then it gradually over the years just dissipates and fades away into the far reaches of the universe. But there are others who, I suppose, do manage to keep developing in terms of character, in terms of music, in terms of topics. I would suggest David Bowie is an example of someone who, people, I think, to say reinvent yourself is a sounds like you're not very happy with the original, the previous version. You feel a need to sort of do something different just because it's different. But I think in David Bowie's case, he was evolving all the time, and exploring different aspects of his own musical interest, and he did that very well right up till his last album, which I never really heard, but I must listen to. And I think it's a more satisfying way to proceed through your life if you don't lose touch with what you've done before. You still kind of embrace some of those elements, but nonetheless you're not just repeating yourself. And that's, I think, the more elegant way to proceed with your musical career, if you have the longevity to be able to prove it to yourself, let alone anybody else.
Yes, and another thing, it seems as though you always, you know, sought out the great, some of the greatest musicians, and that were in Jethro Tull. I mean, from the very beginning, from your school friends, John Evan and Jeffrey Hammond, Barrymore Barlow, to your current lineup. I saw the last U.S. tour. I know you have a new guitar player now in the band, but through those years, there's been some amazing, amazing musicians in the band complementing your songwriting. I mean, from Martin to the late John Glass, Clyde Bunker, Mark Craney, the late Mark Craney. I mean, Eddie Jobson, when you came out and did the A, release in '80, which was originally a solo release, morphed into, it became what became a Jethro Tull release. So I mean, I can go on and on, but the musicianship, you must have an eye and ear for, finding these great players. I know that John, like I said, and Jeffrey and Barrymore, you guys went to school together, but with including those guys through those decades and right up to the present day, you obviously have an eye and ear for great musicianship, being that you are a great musician yourself. So, can you tell us a little bit about, that process of, how,
Well, a lot of it is really quite pragmatic. There's no real joy long term in having musical members of the band who live in a far off land. And our drummer Don Perry, who was with us for many years, he's a resident of Los Angeles, and for him to travel to Europe just to play one concert like last week would be utterly crazy, because apart from the fact that it's very expensive, it's a long way, he'd be jet lagged, as he usually was, for at least 3 days after traveling, and it doesn't work out. So I was looking for a drummer who lived closer to where I live, that we could easily convene, whether it was to go to the airport to go and do a tour, or whether it was getting together for a rehearsal. And so 3 of the guys in the band live in a city that is only, less than an hour away from where I live, and makes it easier for us to get together. Our guitar player, unfortunately, lives a little further in the opposite direction, so it's more of a hike for him to get to rehearsals. But at least he's in the UK. I mean, it's a 2-hour journey rather than a 45-minute one, but at least it's not so bad. And Florian, who lived in Munich, that was practical, but you would a day to get here, and then some work, and then a day to get home again. If it was only coming in for 1 day of rehearsal or 1 day of recording, it's still quite exhausting, when you have that travel to do. More exhausting these days than it would have been 20 or 30 years ago, because of course air travel is a lot more arduous and complicated these days than it was in the 70s and 80s and 90s. It's become far from enjoyable. I personally really don't enjoy the travel to go to work. It's hell, but it's what we have to do.
Yes, I noticed this 7 Decades tour starts, August 18th and ends November 4th here in the US. But you have breaks. There's some mini legs going on, but truly looking forward to seeing this tour. I will see it in New York City at the Beacon, which is an amazing place, as you know. And I assume you're planning on playing tracks from the latest 2 releases, as well as 7 decades of hits, correct?
Yeah, that's the mixture of material. It's as I say, it's some very familiar items of old catalog, some less familiar, plus 2 songs from the Zealot Gene and 2 songs from the new album. That's my intention at this point.
Great.
Unless something changes during the next few tours to change my mind, but that's the working set list at the moment is probably pretty close to what I should be playing next week in Shepherd's Bush Empire in London.
Great. Well, I wish you continued success with your latest release. I'm sure it's going to be very successful throughout the world, and also with this upcoming tour throughout the world. And it'll be great to see you again in November. And I thank you for this time, and stay well and keep on rocking.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the compliments. It's very nice to talk to you. Look forward to seeing you in the summer.
Yes.
Well, not in the Beacon. It won't be until November
1st.
That's it. Yes, there you go. All righty. Take care.
Yes,
Bye-bye now.
take care. Thanks, Ian. Bye
Bye-bye.
now.